Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a story that feels like it's moving closer to a breaking point with every passing week. Tensions between Washington and Tehran are rising fast, and the entire Middle East appears to be holding its breath. For years, friction between the United States and Iran has simmered just below the surface. Sanctions, proxy conflicts, military posturing, cyber operations, and diplomatic breakdowns have created a volatile mix that now looks dangerously unstable. What makes this moment different is the convergence of crises. The war in Gaza, instability in Lebanon, attacks on shipping lanes, militia strikes on U.S. positions, and direct exchanges between regional rivals have created a landscape where a single miscalculation could trigger something much larger. Washington has made it clear that it wants to deter escalation. Tehran insists it does not seek full-scale war. Yet both sides continue to move pieces across the board. American carrier strike groups patrol near the Persian Gulf. Iranian-backed militias operate across Iraq and Syria. Israel conducts operations it says are necessary for its security. Armed groups aligned with Tehran vow retaliation. The pattern is familiar. Pressure builds. A strike happens. Retaliation follows. Diplomatic channels strain. And then, for a moment, things cool down. Until the next spark. But now, the sparks are landing closer to dry tinder. At the heart of this confrontation is a long-standing strategic rivalry. The United States has spent decades trying to limit Iran's regional influence, its ballistic missile program, and its nuclear ambitions. Iran, for its part, views American military presence around its borders as encirclement and interference. Sanctions have been a central tool. Washington has imposed waves of economic restrictions aimed at crippling Iran's oil exports and financial networks. Tehran has responded by expanding its regional alliances and building leverage through non-state actors. That brings us to the network of groups often described as Iran's axis of resistance. These include Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, along with various militias in Iraq and Syria. While each operates with its own local agenda, they share ideological and strategic alignment with Tehran. For Washington, attacks by these groups are not isolated incidents, they're seen as extensions of Iranian strategy. For Tehran, these actors provide strategic depth and deterrence without requiring direct conventional confrontation with the United States. This gray zone conflict has defined the region for years, but gray zones can turn black and white very quickly. One of the most sensitive flashpoints is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply passes. The Strait of Hormuz has long been a pressure point in U.S.-Iran tensions. Any disruption there would have immediate global economic consequences, and both sides know it. Recent months have seen an uptick in incidents involving commercial vessels, drone interceptions, and naval maneuvers. Even when shots have not fired, close encounters raise the risk of miscalculation. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has reinforced its regional posture. Pentagon officials describe these deployments as defensive and deterrent in nature. They argue that visible strength reduces the likelihood of wider war. Critics, however, warn that increased military presence can also raise the stakes. More ships, more aircraft, more troops, each additional asset becomes another potential target. Diplomatically, the situation is equally tense. The nuclear deal, once seen as a framework for de-escalation, has effectively collapsed. Efforts to revive negotiations have stalled. Trust is minimal, and political pressures on both sides limit flexibility. In Washington, policymakers face domestic debates over how tough to be. Some argue that failing to respond forcefully to attacks invites further aggression. Others warn that overreaction could pull the U.S. into another prolonged Middle Eastern conflict. In Tehran, leaders balance defiance with caution. Iran's leadership must project strength at home and abroad, but it also understands the risks of direct war with a militarily superior adversary. This balancing act creates a dangerous dynamic. Each side seeks to deter the other without crossing a red line. The problem is that red lines are often unclear. Israel's role adds another layer of complexity. Israel views Iran as its primary strategic threat and has repeatedly stated it will act to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons capability. Israeli strikes on targets in Syria and elsewhere are part of that broader strategy. Iran, in turn, has warned that attacks on its personnel or interests will be met with retaliation. This web of deterrence and retaliation extends beyond borders. Cyber operations have become a shadow battlefield. Infrastructure, financial systems, and communication networks have all been targets in a quiet but persistent digital war. These operations often remain unclaimed, but their impact can be significant. Then there is the human cost. Civilians across the region bear the brunt of instability. Economic hardship, displacement, and insecurity shape daily life in places already exhausted by years of conflict. Oil markets react to every headline. Investors monitor troop movements and diplomatic statements as closely as military planners do. A single escalation can spike prices and ripple across global economies. So how close are we to a true breaking point? That depends on how each side calculates risk. If Washington believes that failing to respond decisively undermines its credibility, it may choose stronger action. If Tehran concludes that deterrence requires a bold move, it may test limits further. History shows how quickly escalation can spiral. A drone strike leads to retaliation. Retaliation leads to broader targeting. Broader targeting draws in additional actors, and suddenly what was meant as a limited message becomes an open conflict. There are also internal political calendars to consider. Election cycles, domestic protests, economic pressures all shape how leaders make decisions. Strong rhetoric often plays well at home, even if it complicates diplomacy abroad. Back-channel communications may still exist. Even at moments of peak tension, adversaries often maintain quiet lines to prevent misunderstandings. Whether those channels are active and effective right now remains unclear. What is clear is that the region is more interconnected than ever. An incident in Iraq can trigger reactions in Lebanon. A strike in Syria can provoke responses in the Gulf. Shipping disruptions can affect Asia, Europe, and beyond. All eyes are on how the next incident is handled. Will it be contained, or will it cascade? Another factor is military technology. Drones, precision-guided missiles, and advanced surveillance systems compress decision times. Leaders have fewer minutes to assess and respond. That speed increases the risk of error. At the same time, both sides understand the catastrophic cost of full-scale war. Direct conflict between the United States and Iran would not be limited or surgical. It would likely involve regional allies, proxy groups, and possibly attacks on critical infrastructure. Energy facilities could be targets. Major cities could face missile threats. Global markets would react violently. That shared awareness of consequences has so far acted as a brake, but brakes can fail under pressure. Public rhetoric has grown sharper. Statements from officials on both sides increasingly frame the other as reckless or destabilizing. Such language narrows diplomatic space. Regional allies also shape the equation. Gulf states weigh their security partnerships against their economic ties. European powers call for restraint while worrying about energy supplies and refugee flows. China and Russia observe closely, with each their own strategic interests. Every major power understands that a large-scale Middle Eastern war would reshape global alignments. For now, we are in a phase of heightened brinkmanship. Military assets are positioned, alliances are activated, warnings are issued. But the first direct, unmistakable clash between American and Iranian forces has not yet occurred in this cycle. The question is whether deterrence holds, or whether one side misreads the other's intentions. Sometimes conflict does not begin with a grand decision, it begins with a misunderstanding. A radar lock mistaken for an imminent strike, an intercepted drone interpreted as a prelude to attack, a militia action that exceeded what its sponsor intended. In such a tense environment, even disciplined actors can lose control. The world has seen similar moments before. periods where analysts speak of red lines, thresholds, and last chances. Sometimes those moments pass quietly, other times they mark the start of something much larger. Right now, the Middle East feels suspended between those two outcomes. Markets fluctuate but have not collapsed. Diplomats issue warnings but still speak of restraint. Military forces maneuver but have not fully engaged. That fragile balance could persist, or it could shatter. Ultimately, the countdown to conflict is not measured only in troop deployments or missile ranges. It's measured in political will. If leaders decide that escalation serves their interests, events will move quickly. If they conclude that restraint preserves more power than confrontation, the crisis may gradually cool. For citizens watching from afar, the situation can seem distant, but its consequences would be global. Energy prices, supply chains, migration flows, and geopolitical alliances